Wife contracts STD and ends up in hospital after infidelity with her boss is exposed. I 39 male, my wife and I had been together for a decade, and while we didn't have kids, I considered us a family in our own quiet way. I remember the day things began to feel off. She had grown distant, subtle stuff at first. She seemed distracted, always on her phone, texting with someone and turning the screen away whenever I passed by. She barely made eye contact, giving half-hearted answers to basic questions. At night, she rolled over with her back to me, sometimes staying up late, saying she needed to send one last work email. I tried not to be paranoid. After all, everyone has busy periods at work, and we'd had our share of stressful months. But this time, it felt heavier, like a tension humming between us. One evening, a few weeks before everything blew wide open. She came home late after some office event, smelling of red wine and something I couldn't place. She said her boss invited everyone out for drinks to celebrate landing a new client. I didn't argue. I tried to trust her. But the next morning, I noticed the subtle shift in her demeanor again. More texts, more rushed moments out of the room when her phone buzzed. And then there was the strange receipt I found near the kitchen trash. A hotel bar charge. Signed not by her, but by someone else, though I recognized her initials scribbled underneath. She brushed it off as a group tab, but her voice cracked slightly when she spoke. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I'd seen friends' marriages disintegrate over suspicions that later turned out to be misunderstandings. But the evidence piled up fast. There was a charged energy in the air, like static before a storm. I felt it when I saw a text pop up on her phone screen just as I walked by. "Thanks for last night. Let's do it again soon." She yanked the device away, glaring at me, defending her privacy. I didn't push her right then. I decided to wait to gather more information. Because if I was wrong, I'd ruin our relationship with baseless accusations. If I was right, I needed to know exactly how deep this went. A week later, she called in sick to work. That wasn't entirely unusual, but the look on her face was. She seemed anxious, jumpy. I came home that evening to find her hunched over the bathroom sink, looking pale. She said she felt feverish. I urged her to see a doctor if it got worse. It did. Over the next couple of days, she looked weaker, avoided me even more, and seemed nervous when I suggested medical attention. Finally, when she could barely stand, I insisted on driving her to the local hospital's urgent care. There, under the harsh fluorescent lights, she shifted uneasily as a doctor asked a few standard questions. She danced around the truth until the tests came back. The doctor spoke to her in private first, then pulled me aside. That's when I got the news. She had contracted an STD. My stomach lurched. I don't think I reacted much externally. I just stared at the floor and nodded my head. The doctor told me it'd be wise if I got tested too. I did, negative thankfully. That's when everything became crystal clear. She had been sleeping with someone else. The pieces fell into place. The mysterious texts, the hotel bar charge, the late nights, the distant behavior. All of it pointed to one conclusion. I confronted her in the sterile hospital corridor. She tried to deny it at first, said it could have been from a past partner long before that, maybe it was dormant. But we'd been together long enough, and we both knew how ridiculous that sounded. When I pressed, tears welled in her eyes, and finally, she confessed it was her boss. Her arrogant, flashy, and apparently manipulative boss who had a reputation at her workplace for pushing boundaries. He was known for cornering younger staff at after-work parties and making them prove their loyalty. I guess my wife fell into that trap, or maybe she went willingly. Either way, she crossed a line she could never uncross. I couldn't stand her holding her hand. I stepped away, furious, disgusted, humiliated. Rage and heartbreak converged inside me, creating a strange numbness in my limbs. She reached out, but I pulled back. I felt like everything I'd built my life on, trust, respect, comfort, had been yanked out from under me. I told her I needed the truth. How long had this been going on, and what exactly had happened? As we drove home in silence that night, I pressed for details, at least enough to understand the scale of her betrayal. She admitted they'd been meeting secretly for a couple of months, sneaking into cheap hotel rooms, sometimes after a late client meeting or during her lunch break. He'd been complimenting her work, grooming her with flattery, expensive wine, and mentoring sessions that crossed every professional boundary. She confessed that, at times, she felt cornered. He was her superior, after all, with the power to fire her or sabotage her career. But as I listened, I couldn't help wondering how much of this was genuine coercion and how much was an excuse to shield herself. Back at the house, I packed a small overnight bag and drove to a motel. I couldn't bear to sleep under the same roof. She tried to stop me, pleading for a chance to explain, to fix things, but I was done talking for the moment. I wanted distance. In that cramped motel room, I sat on the edge of the bed, my phone in hand, scrolling through old photos of us. Pictures from happier times, birthdays, trips to the coast, silly selfies after too many beers. I felt like I was looking at strangers. The next morning I started thinking rationally. She was still my wife legally. We had a mortgage together, joint bank accounts, insurance. This wasn't just emotional. It had financial and legal implications. Also, she was sick and needed treatment. I had to decide how to handle this carefully. Did I want to get a divorce? Part of me screamed yes. Did I want revenge? Another part of me said I deserved justice. Not just against her, but against that boss who preyed on a married woman. I knew her company had an HR department with strict policies. If he was sleeping with subordinates, that violated countless regulations. He likely broke laws if he made her feel pressured, and he gave her an STD. That opened up a whole different world of possible legal consequences. I called a close friend who was a lawyer. I didn't give full details at first, just said I needed advice about workplace harassment and marital infidelity. He explained that if her boss coerced her through workplace power dynamics, that could be grounds for a lawsuit. As for the STD, in some states, knowingly transmitting one can lead to serious legal trouble. Of course, I needed proof. Text messages, emails, hotel receipts, medical records. Proof that he manipulated her, that he led these secret encounters, and that he knew what he was doing was harmful. I spent the next few days, quietly gathering evidence. She was recuperating at home, ashamed and withdrawn. She slept in the guest room. I combed through her phone records, not touching her phone directly, but checking old bills, looking for patterns of calls and texts. I found a storage box with receipts for hotel rooms, dinners, and drinks I knew nothing about. The dates matched nights she said she had office events. My anger deepened. At times, I wanted to confront him directly, march into his office, knock on his door, and let him have it. But that might land me in jail, and he'd likely slip away unscathed. I needed a more strategic approach. I told her I knew everything. I demanded she come clean about how it started. She broke down, sobbing. She said it began innocently. He offered to mentor her, praised her work, took her under his wing. She admitted it stroked her ego. He kept pushing boundaries slowly. Making sexual jokes, and when she didn't object, he escalated. Eventually, he kissed her in his office after hours. She didn't stop him. After that, it was an ongoing affair. She claimed she tried to end it once, but he threatened to give her a bad performance review or block a promotion she'd been working toward. She felt stuck, and instead of telling me or reporting him, she went along. She said she regretted it every day. I believe she regretted getting caught and infected, not necessarily her actions. I told her I wanted a separation. She begged me to reconsider, to at least give her a chance to fix things. She said she would report him to HR if that would help. I considered it. If she came forward, maybe I'd have leverage. But I was wary. She might twist the story to protect herself. Still, having her cooperation could expose him. I agreed that we would talk to a lawyer together. If she truly wanted to atone, she'd have to help me bring this man down. Let him face the consequences of his arrogance. We met with a lawyer who specialized in employment law and family issues. I laid out what we had, the hotel receipts, the text messages, the STD test results, the timeline. The lawyer said we potentially had a case for sexual harassment and maybe a personal injury claim if we could prove he knew he had an STD and failed to disclose it. Also, the affair and its repercussions would likely factor into any divorce proceedings, possibly influencing alimony or settlement terms. My wife seemed nervous, fidgeting with her hands while the lawyer spoke. I could see she was scared of losing her job, her reputation, or facing legal scrutiny herself. The lawyer advised a careful approach. First, confront the company's HR department with the evidence. We'd file suit. I decided that before making any moves, I wanted concrete proof of his misconduct. My wife still had message threads stored in a cloud backup she'd never bothered to delete. When she showed them to me, I saw his tone, entitled, pushy, and manipulative. He wrote things like, "If you want that raise, you know what I need tonight, and don't disappoint me, "I've got big plans for your future." It made my blood boil. He used his position to coerce her to treat her like an object he could toy with, and she allowed it for career advancement or fear. Either way, it was sickening. The next step was contacting HR. My wife emailed their department, asking for a confidential meeting. I went along, not inside the meeting but waiting nearby. She presented the messages, described the intimidation, and revealed the STD situation. Or at least pretended to be. They promised an internal investigation, but I wasn't naive. Companies often try to cover their own backs first. After the meeting, we sent a preservation notice to her employer through our lawyer, ensuring they wouldn't dare delete or tamper with any digital evidence. As we waited on the outcome, things escalated. Her boss, perhaps getting wind of trouble, tried reaching out to her. He sent a long email, alternating between apologies and threats. He said that if she tried to ruin him, he'd tell everyone how she begged for attention, that he'd make sure her reputation was trash in this industry. His entitlement was on full display. He even hinted that he knew people in our community and could spread rumors about me as well, paint me as abusive or unstable. It was a pathetic attempt at intimidation. Instead of backing down, I forwarded that email straight to our lawyer in HR. Within a week, HR sent a message. He'd been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. That was a good start, but I wanted more. I wanted him held accountable, maybe even facing criminal charges if we could prove he knowingly infected her. Our lawyer reached out to a reputable private investigator who specialized in workplace harassment cases. The investigator dug deeper. Found other employees who complained about his behavior over the years. Most never pursued formal complaints out of fear. Now, with our evidence, they might come forward. A pattern of abuse could seal his fate. In the meantime, my wife tried to mend fences with me, apologizing daily, expressing remorse. I listened, but remained distant. Trust had been destroyed. I told her I intended to file for divorce once this was over. She cried, saying she'd do anything to keep me. But my mind was made up. I was determined to emerge from this mess with my dignity intact. The boss's next move was to lawyer up. His attorney sent a letter claiming my wife consented fully and that they had a mutually beneficial relationship. The letter suggested that if we pursued legal action, they would counter with defamation suits, dragging us through a lengthy court battle. Our lawyer assured us that their threats were hollow, especially with the text messages, which clearly showed coercion and threats related to employment conditions. Also, their defamation claim would fail under scrutiny since we had substantial evidence and we hadn't made any public accusations yet, just internal HR complaints and private legal consults. Still, I worried. This man sounded desperate. I took precautions, changed the locks on the house, installed a security camera at the front door. My wife's car tires were slashed one morning. I couldn't prove he did it, but I had suspicions. I documented everything. I reported the vandalism to the police, who made a note of it. It would all come together eventually. The company's investigation wrapped up faster than I expected. They found him in violation of multiple codes of conduct and terminated him. That was a victory, but not the end. He didn't go quietly. He sent my wife another threatening message from a new phone number, insisting he'd make sure this blows up in our faces. We reported this to the police, who issued a warning and documented the harassment. A restraining order seemed like a good idea, and our lawyer agreed. We quickly got a temporary restraining order against him. If he violated it, he'd face arrest. With him fired, his reputation at the company was shattered. I knew he'd try to spin it, maybe claim he was leaving for a better job, but we were ready. Once the dust settled, we filed a civil suit for damages related to the STD infection, citing negligence and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Our lawyer explained that if we proved he knowingly had the STD and failed to disclose it, we had a strong case. Discovery would force him to turn over medical records. If he tested positive before sleeping with my wife, he was done. During the legal process, I decided to confront my wife one last time about what she really wanted. She cried again, saying she was sorry, that her self-esteem had been low, that she felt old and unappreciated at work and fell under his spell. I told her the truth. I no longer loved her the way I once did. The affair destroyed something fundamental. After the court cases settled, I planned to file for divorce. She said she understood that she wouldn't fight me. She said she deserved whatever I decided. But her compliance worried me. Would she remain on my side against her former boss? I needed her full cooperation. Without her testimony, it would be harder to prove certain aspects. She agreed to testify. In exchange, I promised not to go after her assets too harshly in the divorce. I wasn't out for money. I want a closure in justice. She seemed relieved to have a defined role. Meanwhile, the investigator found more. 2 other women from the firm claimed he pressured them. One who left the company a year ago wrote a sworn statement describing a similar pattern. Compliments, drinks, threats, and eventually sexual favors. This established a pattern that could bolster our case. Our lawyer filed the civil suit. The boss's lawyer tried to stall, requesting extensions, but the judge didn't let them drag it out indefinitely. During a preliminary hearing, the judge reviewed some evidence in camera and indicated the case had merit. The boss's lawyer looked nervous. The day of the deposition arrived. My wife recounted how he cornered her, how he made her feel that refusing him would sink her career. She detailed the threats in emails and texts, which we had printed as exhibits. As a willing participant, pointing out flirtatious messages she'd sent. She admitted she played along at times, afraid of repercussions. But we had the text where he explicitly said, "Remember, I control your future here," which obliterated the idea of consensual, enthusiastic involvement. After the deposition, we received a quiet settlement offer, a significant sum of money if we dropped the suit and signed an NDA. My lawyer reviewed it with me. Did I want to settle? Money would not fix my marriage or restore my trust, but it would help pay for the hospital bills, therapy, and my future restart. My lawyer suggested that if I wanted revenge, true, fair revenge, forcing him to publicly face trial would be more satisfying. Settlements hush things up. Trials expose the truth. But there was risk. Trials can drag out, become emotionally draining, and he might still try dirty tricks. I discussed it with my wife. She said she'd support whatever decision I made. Deep down, I wanted him held accountable in a public forum. I wanted the record to show what he did. No hiding behind closed settlements. I told my lawyer to reject the offer. We go to trial if necessary. In the weeks leading to trial, the boss tried another dirty move. He posted anonymous online comments accusing me of being a bitter husband who couldn't satisfy my wife. He hinted that I orchestrated this whole thing for a payout. We documented all of it. Our investigator traced the comments back to his known IP addresses, adding harassment and defamation to our claims. He was burying himself deeper. The trial date approached and I felt a strange calm. I knew the truth was on my side. He had lost his job. And his reputation was in tatters. He'd spent months squirming, trying every trick to avoid accountability. Now we would put everything on the table. On the morning of the trial, his lawyer tried one last gambit, claiming some crucial piece of evidence was missing. The judge granted a brief recess. When we returned, my lawyer presented backup copies of every text message and email. The judge looked unimpressed with their stalling tactics. During testimony, we heard from the other women who came forward. They described similar patterns of manipulation. I watched his face as they spoke. He looked cornered, panicked. His entitlement had finally met a wall he couldn't bulldoze through. My wife described the STD diagnosis, the humiliation, the fear. I described the emotional toll on our marriage, the vandalism, the threats. The jury listened closely. Before the trial ended, his lawyer approached ours privately, offering a substantially larger settlement. This time, it included a public apology and full responsibility on his part. My lawyer relayed the offer to me. Going through a full trial was exhausting and uncertain. The new offer guaranteed a formal admission of wrongdoing, a large financial compensation, and no NDA. He wanted this over and done with. But he was willing to eat his words publicly. I waited carefully and decided to accept. A trial was risky and I already had what I needed. His life was in ruins, his career finished. The settlement would help me start fresh. We took the settlement. He issued a public statement taking full responsibility, acknowledging he violated boundaries and caused harm. His name was Mud, the industry we lived in was small. He would have a hard time finding reputable work again. The other victims could still pursue their own claims if they wanted. We paved the way for them. After all was said and done, I filed for divorce. It was straightforward. We had no kids, and after discussing terms, my wife agreed to an amicable split. I didn't need to destroy her financially. I just wanted out. She understood. She moved to a smaller apartment in a different part of town. I refinanced the house in my name only. We parted ways quietly. She sent a few tearful texts afterward, but I responded politely and didn't encourage further conversation. Now reflecting on it all, I see what a tangled mess it was. I learned how quickly trust can evaporate, how entitlement corrupts people in positions of power, how betrayal can upend everything familiar. But I also learned to stand firm. I didn't give in to his threats or settle for a quiet payout at the start. I pushed him until he faced the consequences. That in its own way gave me closure. The scar of betrayal remains, but at least I know I didn't let him walk away without repercussions. I've started to rebuild my life. The house feels quieter now, but it's a peaceful quiet. Work continues as usual. I'm saving money, considering a vacation somewhere far away. Maybe I'll meet new people, start anew, be wiser about trust. I'm not sure what the future holds. But I know I'm not weighed down by the chaos anymore. That's enough for now. Thank you for watching. For more videos like this, please like and subscribe.